I'm Judy Johnson, the current president of the Collaborative Law Institute of Minnesota for 2024, and I am thrilled that I leaned on Josh Rampi to come and join us today and talk about the work he does. He is one of the busiest people I know for all kinds of different reasons, so I feel really lucky that he was willing to come and talk to us today. Josh, what is it that you do in collaborative team practice?
Well, I am considered a family specialist, and so my job is to help families figure out how to go from this type of a situation to adjust as it relates to going from maybe one home to two. It's maybe the easiest way to say I'm a mental health professional, and my role is to support families during the transition, which covers a lot of different things in a lot of different areas, but that's kind of the flyover of what that looks like.
And sometimes you actually lead the joint meetings too, and we all come together and we're kind of considering options and weighing options and getting ready to make decisions. Sometimes you come and lead the meetings. Tell us more about that.
Well, it's an interesting role because my background is as a mental health professional, a master's level therapist. And so coming into the team meetings, I'm a neutral. So a part of my role is just to help kind of facilitate the conversations and then be able to pause things when we need to pause them and support folks, because when we're making decisions, it's never just a right brain or a left brain singular, like, okay, 1 + 1 is 2, and I'll make the decision. It's much more complex than that because we are emotional beings, and our emotions help drive the process. They're important. We don't want to neglect them, but we also don't want to have them driving the bus either. And so a part of my role is to help support not only the clients, but also the professionals in the room about, okay, how do we pace through this? How do we take a break when we need to take a break? How do we think about creative solutions for families in maybe new ways? And ultimately support the family.
Collaborative team divorce is a facilitative process, meaning we don't make decisions for people, right? We are experts at helping people make decisions for themselves. So how would you say that we do that? How do we actually help people to make decisions for themselves?
I think one of the things that I find myself doing in my role is when you go into a divorce process, there's so much uncertainty. So it's helping folks understand, what do I do with uncertainty, right? What's my response to that? And as a species, we don't do well with that. We just don't at all. Whether it's this, the climate, politics, we just don't do well with not knowing what's going to come next. So that's, I think, one of the pieces that I find myself doing a lot of coaching around is that we don't know what we don't know, and that's okay. How do we get information? Because with new information, we can make new decisions. But oftentimes there's what I think Judy's going to say versus what actually Judy is going to say, but I'm already responding to Judy because I've already planned ahead. A lot of that happens, right? What I think's happening in my head versus what's actually in the room. And then with the families we work with, there's a lot of, I would say, other shadowy figures or others examples of divorces. So like the neighbors on the left and the neighbor on the right have had these experiences, and they usually are poor or really difficult. And so they kind of come in predisposed to, this ain't going well. This ain't going well at all. So to be able to coach a little bit around uncertainty, being able to I find myself wanting to map out the process as well. So like we're kind of going to do A, and then once we do A, we'll figure out how we're going to do B. Not in a rigid sense, but in that like this is a process with guardrails, and we're here to help you come up with a solution for your family. Now, sometimes folks get stuck, to be blunt with you. They just get stuck in emotions. They get stuck in maybe they flood. And as a team, we've been trained to support folks, like how do we take a break? I often ask folks how they make decisions. And so my wife is she gets information and she is decisive and done and she fires. I am a get the information and then give me a day or two. Right? I'm going to be slow. And so trying to understand how to help folks pace through them coming up with a solution. I think our job as professionals is to get them information, get them options, get them breathing room to think through it, help them pace.
You have your mediation training too, right, in family practice. What drew you to doing collaborative team divorce?
That's a great question. So early in my career, I was a rookie marriage and family therapist, just green around the ears, not knowing much, but working with families. I love what I do as a therapist. And I was working with families, I would say individuals and families that were about a year or two post-divorce. And so typically what I would learn is that things were happening during the separation, the divorce in of itself, there was just poor decisions made. And to be blunt, there was often poor advice given to families. And the repercussions of it were lingering far beyond when the dust settled and all the judgment decrees and the judge signs off on the documents. There was this lingering, like the family still hadn't healed or got support. And so I was working with them and I thought, wow, it's really hard to undo what was done 2 years ago for a family. And then my sister, who's a collaborative law attorney, she said, Josh, I think you'd be good at this. And I said, I don't know about that. And she said, no, I think you'd be good at it. And then I thought to myself, well, I can work with folks post-decree. I can work with them post-year or two and support them, which I think is important and needed. Or I could get in the kitchen when it's really hot, right? In the midst of that separation, in the midst of that uncertainty, and see if I can provide some guidance and some here's what research says, here's kind of best practices according to Josh, which I always try to own. I have no research on this one, but this is how to support your kids, in my opinion. And then I got mediation training and collaborative law training and kind of cross-trained in different things, and then started doing it in terms of supporting families, and just really began to love it. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's very hard work. It's complicated work. There's lots that happens.
And we don't always work with simple cases. A lot of the families that we work with have kind of complicated problems with a lot of pieces to work through.
Mm-hmm. And it really varies from, families that have adopted children, biological children, children with IEPs and special needs, kids on the spectrum, blended family issues, right? So we've got, it really, no family really comes in the same kind of 2.5 children, a dog and a white picket fence. That just doesn't show up. But that's one of the things I love about collaborative is it allows me as well as the team to think creatively about what does this family need? So first I think about how do I get to know the family? I really want to understand how the adults and the parents think. I also want to know how the kids are wired and kind of their software, what that looks like. So then kind of downstream, I'm able to come up with a solution to say, or at least some advice about this parenting plan may make sense, or this schedule may make sense in terms of recommendations that I may make.
So you actually produce a product for people in Collaborative Team Divorce, which is the parenting plan. Can you tell us what that is for our listeners that maybe may not know?
Sure. Well, a parenting plan is literally what it is. It's what's the plan to parent your kids. And so I've got a lot of kids, so I know some folks have one.
We'll get to that.
I've got a lot.
Ask about that.
But ultimately, it's a comprehensive plan that takes into account your kids and their ages, what's developmentally appropriate, and ultimately, how are decisions going to be made based off of your kids' ages and personalities and needs as it relates to where are they going to go to school? Okay, how are we going to make that decision? What about medical care? Post-pandemic, the need for mental health in adolescents and children has just skyrocketed. And so how are we going to make decisions as parents on what that's going to look like? As well as spiritual and religious upbringing, faith components or cultural components. How do we incorporate things that are already in the fabric of a family?
Yeah. Extended family.
Extended family, right? Grandmas and grandpas. And then also the parenting plan includes what's the schedule going to look like? I think that's probably the biggest uncertainty that folks come in is what is this going to look like? How am I going to navigate seeing our kids less, right? And what does that look like? Because I think there's a lot of grief and a lot of sadness around seeing them less. And again, folks,
everybody wants to be a full parent.
Yeah.
You still want to be a full parent, even if you're not there 100% of the time.
And folks don't know what they don't know, and I can't fault them for that. Right. And so a part of my process is to walk them through slowly, but consistently about here are the options. Here's what the most common plan is in the state of Minnesota. Yeah, right. It's not going to be a cookie cutter for your family or mine, right. But here's what might be ideal. why don't we think about these three options?
That's one of the things I love the most about collaborative team divorce is that every family is unique and really every process is unique. We kind of design a unique process for people, but also a unique solution, right? And people need to know that parenting plans are actually statutory creations. They get attached to the judgment and decree and get filed with the courts. So it actually does have a living value for the family.
And when it comes to the parenting plans, there's the components that you discussed, like are very important that need to be in there that are much more, I guess, legally based or statute based. Then there are things that our community has come up with, the collaborative community has come up with that are like best practices. So it doesn't have any statute in the state of Minnesota, but we've over the years figured out like if you do this wrong or incorrectly or poorly, it just hurts families, it hurts kids. So we've put kind of what I call best practices. And then I spend a lot of time with families going like, here are some best practices. We need to understand what transitions look like as from the kids' perspective, how they show up after that first transition to go. And then like, is there a bit of a residual effect to that transition? And how do we navigate that? That's not going to be a statute-based thing. That's going to be a, how do we support a family? And
a child-by-child thing, because the transitions between homes can be the most critical time for kids, and to make them optimistic and something that they look forward to instead of dread is just a key to their adjustment. So.
And they often don't have words for it either. So I think about even adolescents. So even the I'm 16 years old and my brain's somewhat developed, I think they still will just exude the behavior and the and the frustration or anxiety or sadness versus coming out and saying like, I don't like this. Could somebody help me work through this? Right. And so being able to support parents around that to be able to identify like, here's the new rhythm that your family is going to be in. And let's pay attention to these key points that might be around these transitions or, we're coming up into holiday season. So how do we navigate holidays? And what does that look like? What have you done historically? And how do we keep those historical experiences in a family while also being open to new experiences?
I want to make sure we ask you a little bit about the rest of your life. You've got you've got also a therapy practice, an individual therapy practice. What's the difference between what you do in collaborative team divorce and what you do in your therapy practice?
Sure. That is a great question because I'm often finding people are curious about that as well. Because I'm a mental health professional, as a marriage and family therapist. As a therapist, and when I wear that hat, it's very common to be able to go into family of origin and working through how'd you get here? How'd your past set you up to get here where you are now? And then where do you want your future to be? Lots of clinical tools and methodologies and journal-based research that will inform the practice that I do. Now, I take all of that into collaborative practice. I think the difference is I know that we're working for a common goal and a common good. And I often think about it as
an end point,
towards an end point. So I think about sometimes from a football metaphor that, as a therapist, if there's a fumble, I can go out on the field and put the ball down and we can sit cross-legged and talk about like, how did the football land on the ground, right? Like that's kind of what a therapist can do. And we can spend a lot of time or a little time unpacking that. When I'm working with families in collaborative, I find that I may do the same thing and say like, I can see that the ball got fumbled. I can see somebody made a poor choice or poor decisions were made or great decisions were made that got the ball where it is. And I go like, and we got to move. What can we do next to pick up a yard or two in the process? I'm not interested in launching families further than they can kind of handle or tolerate because that's a part of my job is to help this kind of help the family pace in the process, which is a very intuitive experience. I don't have like a book or a manual, short of like we need to go a little quicker or no, we're going to have to slow down a little bit because adjusting to a changing family impacts every part of who we are.
So I want to make sure we save a little time here to talk about your family. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I've got a lot of kids that range from junior high to now daycare. And I've got 4 boys and 1 girl, and they all keep me busy. I recently broke my foot. I broke a bone in my foot.
I did not know that.
And
Oh.
I went to the doctor, and the doctor took an X-ray, and he said to me, well, we can put you in a boot, or you can kind of walk it off if you'd like. And I said, well, what do you recommend? And he says, well, how active are you? And I said, well, the only time I remember sitting is in my job. But from in the morning, sun up to sundown, I'm moving. And so he looked at me and he smiled and he said, I'll get you a boot. And they gave me the moon boot and put me in the moon boot. But I thought, yeah, no. So I'm very busy. I love being a parent. I enjoy it. My wife and I coach soccer when we can. So that keeps us busy.
She's in environmental science, isn't she, your spouse?
Yeah. So my wife has a PhD in geospatial analysis, which is way above my head, way above my pay grade. When people ask me what she does, I basically say she's really good at looking at satellite imagery.
She's smart. Yeah.
She looked at satellite imagery. So our software is very different. She is scientifically minded, and she is direct. And I am easygoing and laid back, and I'm kind of living in the gray in my life. And she's more of like, well, the numbers have got to add up. So, but it makes for fun. It makes for a lot of fun. A lot of challenges, but a lot of fun.
Josh, I am so thankful that you joined us in Collaborative Team Divorce, and for all the families you've worked with. How many cases do you think you may have done over the years?
That is a great question.
Maybe even.
If I were to ballpark it, I've got to be, I don't know, probably 50 to 70 if I were to just ballpark it.
Yeah.
They kind of ebb and flow.
You haven't been doing it your whole career, but a lot. So, and thank you so much for joining us today and for, sharing your experience and telling our listeners about the work you do and giving them a little light on what that's like. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a privilege to be here. Thank you.